I'm John. I'm 55 years old, and I live in San Diego, California. In December 2022, I was diagnosed with ACLF, which is acute on chronic liver failure, and was given a transplant. It's a very rare diagnosis. From what I understand, it's only 2% of the population that actually suffers from ACLF. I had never heard of ACLF prior to this, and I was shocked, quite frankly, by the news. I am half Latino, and so part of what I think about is there's a gene that is involved with fatty liver disease. So my family does suffer from fatty liver disease, as my sister does, my mother did, all her siblings had fatty liver disease. And so I think that that was a contributing factor of why I was diagnosed with ACLF. My first symptoms were fatigue, but I thought I was just getting old. I just turned 55 back then, and I just assumed that it was sort of the aging process that was beginning to happen to me, not realizing that I was, like I said, in severe danger. But it really did come on very suddenly, dating back to September 2022. I'd gone to a friend's party. As we were setting up the party, we drank wine. And I remember getting a little drunk, not a lot. But then I remember immediately afterward, I wasn't feeling well, and came back from the party with a distended abdomen. And that's when I actually called my primary care physician. She basically told me that I needed to go in and get some lab work done. When the results came back from the labs, I received a call from the hepatology department at the hospital letting me know that I needed to go in and see a doctor immediately. So over Thanksgiving holiday in November of 22, they admitted me into hospital. Shortly before getting into hospital, I began to get jaundiced and had a splitting headache and suffered from fatigue. But mainly it was the dissension in my belly that really caused a lot of concern. I could actually feel the liquid that was beginning to accumulate in my belly, but I just didn't know what it was. So when I arrived, a lot of my symptoms had subsided. They were maybe just thinking that I had viral hepatitis, which eventually would have cleared up. And so I anticipated that I would continue to get better. And that's when the doctor basically told me that I needed to be careful in that I was doing better, but this can turn on a dime. And so I really took heed to what he was saying because it sounded dangerous. But, it wasn't until the entire experience, sort of hit me that I understood how gravely ill I was. I stayed for 15 days. Eventually I was discharged, and they gave me a whole slew of medications to take. Still at that point, to be honest, I don't really feel like I understood what was happening to me. I just remember the week in between hospitalization was terrible. I was in pretty bad shape and progressively got worse over that period of time. I could barely get up and sort of walk around and take my dog out if I needed to. And so on December 6th, I was very compromised mentally at that point. I felt like I had been, unconscious for quite some time. And I don't know how long that was, as I live alone. So I called my sister, but I couldn't really work the phone. I didn't understand how the phone worked. because I had really bad hepatic encephalopathy. So when she came to get me, to take me to hospital, she immediately grabbed my arm and threw me in the car, knowing full well that I was close to dying at that point. The emergency room doctors began talking to me about transplant, and I had no understanding of what that was or how I was going to move forward. And it was only when I was admitted into hospital that by the second week, my kidneys began to fail. So I now had acute kidney injury on top of hepatic encephalopathy, on top of my liver failure. And that was the recipe ultimately that led them to do the transplant workup. There was a coordinated effort amongst the hepatologist team, the nephrologist team, and every other team. Each one of those teams worked in collaboration to get me to a place where I could be stable enough for transplant. I received my transplant exactly 2 days after being listed on the transplant list. What they did was a miracle. We were running out of time, right? There was no time left on the clock. So everything was rushed. I was so sick that I was told that I maybe wouldn't survive 6 months, even transplanted. So it's just really important to give people a lot of options. But in particular, what I mean by that is I would have, in a heartbeat, joined a clinical trial for ACLF in order to continue to survive. I was transplanted on December 22nd, and I was discharged on December 27th, 2022. There was a lot of miracles happening at the same time. So my sister had submitted for her retirement a couple of months before this happened. And so when I was discharged from hospital, I stayed in her apartment, and I stayed there for 2 months rehabilitating during that time. And she was my caretaker. She maintained the apartment for me during that time. And we walked every day. She also drove me to all my doctor's appointments. It's a requirement on behalf of the transplant team to make sure that you have a safe place to go shortly after you're transplanted. I had very specific instructions, what I should do and what I shouldn't do, and what was going to cause me harm and what wasn't going to cause me harm, and how many, when you first get out and you're transplanted, you have, I don't know, upwards of 20 medications that you're taking. For those, there's a 6-month window post-transplant that is crucial to determine whether or not the organ will survive, whether or not that you will reject the organ. When I hit the 6-month mark, there's something that happens to you where you think, well, I might make it. I actually might make it. But it takes that long. The thing about this particular incident in my life is it was so humbling, right? And, it's like you take a lot of things for granted, and I don't take things for granted anymore. It's been a profound change. I pretty much have dedicated my life today to move forward and educate people on ACLF because it's a silent killer. I moved forward and jumped right into working with associations about liver disease, and it was sort of through that I began to sort of uncover the different types of liver failure, and then realizing that this is the one that sort of impacted me and how it impacted me. I think a lot of people are misdiagnosed. Maybe a lot of people don't make it because they were never really diagnosed with ACLF in the beginning. they miss the window of being able to get the help that they need. And unfortunately, society is set up in a way where there's a lot of stigma. When people have liver disease, generally speaking, everybody automatically assumes that it was because of alcohol use disorder. So there is a possibility to get cirrhosis, not from alcohol use disorder, but through fatty liver disease. So it's just important to really understand before people come out with their judgment as to whether or not to move forward. That also includes doctors. They decide by committee to move you forward, and so I don't know, and it certainly wasn't in my case. But maybe there's one doctor who has stigma that maybe votes against it, and that's voting against somebody's life. I'm excited that GenFit is taking a look at clinical trials and developing a drug to help people. Joining GenFit's Patient Advocacy Council was everything, because it really provides people with a lot of hope as to how they're going to manage this. And it not only includes the patient, but it includes the patient's family, friends. It impacts so many other people. And that was the one thing that I recognized as I was laying there, is that how I had impacted so many other lives in getting this condition. I do believe I'm a unicorn. I am currently writing a book that where I talk about my experience. And so what I'm trying to do with the book is educate, but I'm also detailing a story that's really important for people to understand before they get to a place of stigma, is being able to sort of relate a story and have that story impact them positively, to not come out with judgment initially. My story is unique because I ended up with ACLF, but the trauma that I experienced before, everybody's going to be able to relate to. I feel that GenFit and myself have a lot of synergy to create positive change.